Good evening, everyone. The time has just gone 8:15. My camera is a little slow tonight, so I'm looking much darker than I usually do, although it should switch on any moment. And a big welcome to some of our guests who we'll be talking to informally until 8 o'clock. And certainly we'll begin at 8 o'clock. And so to the hundreds of people watching us at the moment on both Zoom and YouTube, a big welcome this evening. Hirsch, tonight, you are running the show tonight. I'm very much second fiddle.
Yeah, it's not what we used to see. So Howie, I'm sure you're going to enjoy the break and put me at the front line. And we've got a great topic. And Karen, great to meet you. I've spoken to you via telephone, so good to meet you online. Greg,
hi, nice to see you.
Great to have you on board. And
hey, everybody.
So Hirsch, you know, Karen Milner is my family. But should we tell them our main claim to fame? And that is Karen got arrested for me in the 1980s and got thrown in jail at a political protest because there was a protest on Wits campus. I didn't know about it. I was sitting in lectures. They called for a representative of SOJUS, the South African Union of Jewish Students. And I was sitting in a law lecture. And Karen felt bad, so she volunteered, went marching off campus, got arrested by the police.
Howard, we lost you at the crucial moment, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I'm not going to lie, but it was certainly something, you know, a story that has stayed with me for a long time. It has the criminal record, just by the way, for attending an illegal gathering, as it was called in those days.
But I not only had to go break the news to Karen's mother that she had just gotten arrested on my behalf, but I had to take her to the Hillbrow police cells. And that night I went into Hillbrow, I bought challah and took it to the police cells. And Karen had a Shabbat service and taught everyone in the police cell. She made kiddush over some wine, which I had negotiated with the station commander to let in. And we had she had challah, and she had a Shabbat service for everyone in the police cells in the Hillbrow police cells.
So yeah, we were released Saturday morning. I remember, Howard. It was it was 1986. So it was a long time ago, but it was certainly about it was a very, very interesting experience. And I don't know if I ever told you, but there was, I don't know if you know how many challahs I actually received in that cell that night. But it seemed like the entire Jewish community, to their credit, sent challahs to Hillbrow Police Station in 1986 for Karen Milner. And I remain deeply touched to this day for all the millions of colours. Every 5 minutes there was a knock on the cell door. And Milan, I'd go and there was another 2. So, this community always
And
comes out.
Karen
and
is
then-
all forgiven. Have you forgiven Howard? And did he ever pay you back for spending
So
a
he's
night?
never paid me back. I've forgiven Howard. I don't think my mother's ever forgiven Howard, but I have to say Howard had to tell my mother that her 18-year-old daughter was in the cell of an apartheid police station. So to be fair, he had his penance.
I suffered, but I did go home. I brought blankets for all of the students in the police cells that night. And when so when Karen was released on the Saturday, it was Shabbos, and she wouldn't drive home. And I remember us sitting outside the police cells in Hillbrow while everyone else was being driven away, and she wouldn't drive. So that's an interesting cultural experience, don't you think?
Absolutely, and we've had hard times before in South Africa. We were in the middle of a state of emergency. Yes, it was when whoever's asked that, it was exactly when Lauren Kaplan was arrested.
So that's Etienne, Lauren's mother, who's watching.
She might also remember tons of colours that are.
So Etienne is busy watching from Toronto together with Aubrey, and Lauren's in Toronto as well. So yes, that was definitely the night that Lauren Kaplan was in the police cells with you. So Greg Solomons, can you do anything to match that story?
No, I think the two of you should continue talking. It's much more interesting than what we're going to talk about. So I think you should continue.
No, but I think it's an interesting cultural phenomenon, like how people rally around other people, particularly within a community, and I think that's part of an amazing story. I mean, you've got a massive staff complement. You're a community all in your own. How many McDonald South Africans employees are there? Have we lost Greg?
No, I think we may have. I think the number's about 16,000.
Well,
I think you mentioned to me.
16,000, yes.
That's a lot of people. Amanda, how many people in the Discovery universe?
About 12,000.
Is that just South Africa or around the world?
Around the world, probably a bit more than that around the world, but we work on a number of 12,000.
So we always mock Sean Mattison because we ask him to sing the company song from China or Japan. Where do they have company songs?
Yeah. In the East, it is very cultural to have some sort of anthem or pledging allegiance to the organization. AIA, Ping An in China, Japan, yes.
So have you ever learned any of the Discovery cultural company songs from any of your Asian partners?
No, but I'd love to hear Sean sing it. So keep pressure us.
So Richard Sutton, I mean, you operate in a very different space. You're very much a one-on-one individual. You're not in a large corporate. Do you ever, when you listen to Greg talk about 16,000 employees or Amanda talking about 12,000 employees, do you ever wish you were part of something big and massive?
So actually, I do engage in a broader scale. So there are kind of one-on-one encounters. There are executive teams that I look after, and there's been organizations where I take on projects for 6 months to a year. So, but not to that scale. I mean, we're talking smaller organizations, 250 people, 500 people, not to that extent where you've got just an incredible human resource there.
So, Karen, you're actually on sabbatical at the moment.
Yep. One of the great benefits of being an academic.
So explain to us who are not in academia how sabbaticals work. So
in the same way as, I mean, it's every 7 years. After you've worked for the university for 7 years, it's not a holiday, just so if anyone's watching from universities, it annoys academics intensely and will get me fired. It's not a holiday, but it's actually an amazing thing that you can take a year off the busyness, if I can put it that way. So I don't lecture, I don't attend any meetings. And the idea is to really pursue research. Is that me who's getting the feedback?
We are having feedback. Let's try. I'm going to go on mute. If Karen, if you speak for one more second, let me see if it's maybe moved one by one. We'll put everyone on mute.
Okay, shall I carry on talking? Is that better? Yeah. So I was saying, so we get a year basically to. No, I'm still getting feedback.
Okay, Rich, I'm going to put you on mute and let's see if that impacts anything.
Okay. So, yeah, that sounds better.
No, I'm still getting it. So, okay, we're now going to try Herschel on mute.
Okay, let me talk again. So the longest explanation of sabbatical ever, but it does seem to have done the trick. So yes, we get a year off from the key, from most responsibilities. I don't have to attend meetings. I don't take any teaching responsibilities. I keep my PhD students, but no other research students. And the idea is primarily to publish and research, which is the kind of function of a university, but often gets lost in the busyness. And I mean, I have seen a few corporates taking it on. There is a real benefit to allowing people, you know, in our case, it's research, but to allowing people to take on a project to free them from all the other busyness around it, and to just focus on that. It's a fantastic retention strategy, because every time I think of leaving, I think, well, 2 years till sabbatical, I might as well hang around. But it really is a way for people who are looking for innovation and for people who are looking for focus. It doesn't have to be a year, but I think it's fantastic.
So we're actually going to ask Amanda if she's come across that in the corporate world at all. But before we do that, Hirsch, so we've identified you as the one who's giving us the feedback. So yes, we have two options. You can either reboot your computer at the moment, or alternatively, you can go get some headphones and a mic.
Yeah, so headphones and a mic is not an option. Is the feedback still there?
Let's talk some more and see if we can still get it.
So a mic is not an option. I can log off and log on.
Yeah, if you don't mind logging off and logging on, that would be fantastic. And while you do that, we're going to ask Amanda about this idea of sabbaticals as part of the corporate world.
It's definitely something we're looking at. It's absolutely brilliant. And listening to the way the professor's talking about it, I'm actually just more encouraged to try and drive it. It's, you know, it certainly does encourage innovation. And I think that it's something that we in the corporate world can look at. Look, we're engaged anyway to a large extent in trying to find ways to innovate as part of our day-to-day work at Discovery, but still it's certainly something to encourage the learning process in some form. At the moment we're using other platforms of learning, multiple different platforms of learning, but it sounds wonderful. And actually you interviewed Danny Frankel from Vitality Group last week, and the two of us were on a fabulous course about 1.5 years ago in Israel. And they were talking about the impact that having sabbaticals has had on the country as a whole, and the extent to which those sabbaticals have actually driven innovation within the country. So, you know, the impact is certainly there. Yeah, hopefully it's something we can look forward to.
So I was busy reading a book on Netflix in the weekend. One of the key things they introduced was the fact that there's no leave policy. You take as much leave as you want. No, you don't have to register it. I know Investec has tried that in South Africa. Have you thought about that at all within the Discovery world?
We do have it, Howie. We have it not across the board. In our call centers, it's a little bit trickier to manage, because you need a certain number of resources on the phones at for a certain amount of time. But within the rest of the organization, we actually do have what's called unlimited leave. You take leave when you need it, as long as the resource process can manage it. You're quite comfortable to take leave. It's a wonderful thing. Yeah.
And what's the results? Are people taking more or less leave, or does it work out that the exact same answer?
It works out the same. We find that people work very hard. We almost have to encourage them. In fact, in December this past year, we had to make what's called forced leave. We had to force everybody to take. They've been working flat out. We could see that our employees had just gone above and beyond over a very tricky year. And we actually forced people to take leave. And it had a tremendous impact, that 2 weeks of forced leave, because it meant that everybody other than essential staff, everybody was on leave. And that meant that the emails coming through were reduced, the calls coming through were reduced, and people could really take a bit of time out. It had tremendous impact on our organization.
So Greg, I see someone else has logged in called Greg Solomon. That either means that someone has your login or someone should be booted out. Can I boot out the second Greg?
There's only one Greg Solomon that I know of. So
okay. In that case, I've removed whoever else has got your login details.
Maybe my comms manager would have had my email, so maybe that one.
Ah, okay. So they can log in on the normal login as opposed to the panelist login. So
good.
Hirsch, we've been talking while you were rebooting. We were talking about this idea of unlimited leave. People take when they want and they need. One of the key learnings from Netflix was that they found people weren't taking leave. They were too nervous to take leave. And one of the things that they had to do was they had to encourage managers to actually take more leave than they would have otherwise, and to almost come back and speak to their employees about their holidays. Some of them would subject them to slideshows of their actual trips to try and make it part of the corporate culture that it was okay to take the extra leave. What's your thought? You run a big organization as well. What's your thought on that?
So how I remember when I worked for various companies before I joined the family business, and I remember applying for leave was always a thing. You used to fill out the form and hand it in with some level of trepidation. And I remember what I think my second or third boss, I used to hand in a leave form, and he always used to say to me, "Why so short?" Hand in leave for 5 days or 7 days or even 2 weeks. And he used to say to me, "Why so short?" And it completely just took the whole thing about asking for leave away. And it's been a great learning, and we do as well. We try as hard as we can to encourage our staff to take all of their leave. In fact, never mind more leave than they should take. Just to get people to take all of their leave, I think, is sometimes a challenge. And I think there's always a feeling, well, who's going to do my job? And when I come back from leave, there's all these emails and there's all this work that's piled up. And so actually, it doesn't, I might as well stick around and work, but we really work hard. We monitor the leave schedules quite closely, and we try and push our staff to take their leave. And when they come and apply for leave, I say to people, "Why so short?"
We're going to go live in 1 minute, but before we do that, Rich, everyone seems to be stressed out of their mind at the moment. Is leave a key component of making sure that people de-stress? Or is this idea, there used to be an idea, as you took leave, you're relaxed, you turned off completely, and now it's not like that. You go on leave with your laptop, you go on leave with your cell phone, you're answering mails, and that's the way you take leave today. Has that impacted on us as humans and our stress levels as humans?
For sure. So I think that, we're all struggling with high demands at the moment. And there's many things we're struggling with, but that's one of the principal stresses. And if we remove that stress by taking time out, certainly some of the negative ramifications, the mental and emotional challenges that are associated with it will diminish. This being said, we've turned into an always-on society where it's very difficult to switch off. It's very difficult to disconnect. And sometimes that's not enough, is just to remove oneself from the environment. And what's more important is really being strategic about how one manages one's stress and one's health, and really looking at it from a holistic perspective and not relying on these brief periods of time off to recover.
So the time has just gone 8:32. A huge welcome to everyone around the world. I see we have people watching us from Cambridge in the United Kingdom and Toronto and the United States, people in the United States and people in South America. We have people all over Asia and Europe as well. A huge welcome to all of you. So lovely to see you. This is in fact the 75th webinar of the South African Jewish Report since lockdown began. Hirsch, do you remember that board meeting before the first one when we said, let's have a webinar and maybe get some doctors to give advice to people about how we should be coping during the period of COVID?
Yeah, I remember how we're just dealing, and we're going to discuss it a bit later in the webinar tonight, just that initial trauma of that lockdown and that fight back, and what do we do in that quick reaction. And we're near 12 months into lockdown, 75 webinars, hundreds of panelists, tens of thousands of viewers.
Actually, hundreds of thousands of viewers.
Yeah.
Probably realistically about 750,000, maybe 800,000 people having watched our webinars over the last 75 webinars that we've done. That's an astounding figure. We've actually become the largest Zoom webinar platform in South Africa and potentially in Africa and certainly in the Jewish world. It's quite amazing. So to everyone who supported us during those 75 webinars, a huge thank you to all of you. It's just been such an honor and privilege on behalf of the South African Jewish Report to be able to provide this service through to the Jewish community, to the general South African community, and to people around the world who've been able to get some value out of the sort of discussions that we'll be having tonight and which we've had in the previous 74 webinars as well. So tonight we have a very interesting discussion. We're talking about culture, we're talking about strategy. We have an amazing panel that's going to be run by Herschel. I'm going to be playing second fiddle. So well, my job tonight is in fact to make sure that all your questions get put through to Herschel and the panel. So if you're on YouTube, please just stick any questions that you have into the comment section. Also, if you're on YouTube, please press the like and subscribe button. That means a huge amount to us. So we'd really appreciate if you do that. If you're watching us on Zoom this evening, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat button. Please chat amongst yourselves. We love to hear where in the world you are. We love to hear your comments and your thoughts as we're going through. But if you have any specific questions that you would like to put to the panel, please use the Q&A button. That's the button that I'll be monitoring and I'll be passing through to Herschel and the team. I'll be monitoring your questions. So please, any questions into the Q&A button beneath. And just a reminder as well that we've been running the South African Jewish Report newspaper. We're in 20-something years of doing it. Danny Kadar, you're on controls this evening. A big welcome to you. Let's show people what's on the front page of this week's edition of the Jewish Report. This devastating story of how arsonists destroyed an entire Mpumalanga bush hotel lodge to take revenge for the fact that a poacher was killed in the Kruger Park. A Jewish-owned lodge was completely ransacked, 40 hotel rooms destroyed, all the employees of the lodge probably going to be losing their jobs, the vehicles torched, devastating impact on the entire community. So we tell that really devastating story on the front page of the Jewish Report tonight. So please have a look there, pick up your copy at your Spar, your Pick and Pay, your Dis-Chem pharmacy, your local garage shop, your exclusive books, your CNA, they're everywhere. Or alternatively, go to www.sajr.co.za. It's our new website. It's mobile friendly. Have a look at it. Make sure you also subscribe for our newsletter. We've now got about 28,000 people that we send a newsletter to every week. Now, Danny, a lot of people tell us that notifications for these Zooms are landing up in their junk mail. We just encourage everyone, join one of our WhatsApp groups as well. We'll be sending out a notification to everyone next week. If things are landing up in your junk mail, please just make sure you join one of our WhatsApp groups. We've got about 6,000-7,000 people on WhatsApp groups that we message out about the webinars that we're doing. So please, let's make sure we can continue to communicate with you. We've got some amazing things coming up in the next few weeks. So we're going to be talking about ivermectin. We're going to be talking about the economy. We have a Purim play with professional actors. They've been they were auditioned. They've been practicing for the last few weeks. There've been rehearsals going on. We've got the most amazing Purim play coming up. For Pesach, we've got some remarkable things. And next Saturday night, can I presume all of our panelists have been to Israel?
Yeah.
And can I presume you've gone to have a beer on the beachfront in a pub called Mike's Place in Tel Aviv on the beachfront, or in Jerusalem, there's Mike's Place near the Midrachov in Jerusalem. Next Saturday night, we're teaming up with Mike's Place. Everyone's on guitar. We have got performers from Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, India, South Africa. We're going to be having a chilled Saturday night with unbelievable music, guitarists and musicians performing from throughout the world as we sit back, maybe have a drink, have a hot chocolate, and watch Unplugged with Mike's Place next Saturday evening. So please make sure that when those adverts come out, that you register. We think we're going to have a spectacular, spectacular week of webinars ahead of us. And so, Hirsch, with that, the 75th webinar of the South African Jewish Report is now in your hands.
Thanks so much, Howie, and thanks for the introduction. And I hope you'll manage sitting in the sidelines, because normally you're in the front line. So enjoy your evening off. And just to welcome everyone, as Howard said, it's our 75th webinar. And thank you, especially Howard, who's almost become the face of the Jewish Report for leading in the way. To our entire board and to the Jewish Report team, Danny on tech, who all of you have seen. And most importantly, to our panelists and to our viewers for your support, your engagement and your time. Without you, none of these things would be possible. I just wanted to just formally welcome our panel this evening. The title is Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast. And we're going to sort of unpack this word called culture. And in fact, when I spoke to one or two other panelists about potentially joining us tonight, the moment I mentioned the word culture, they were out of our domain, not sure I want to get involved in culture. So we're going to try and unpack it a bit. But I think equally so, we're going to talk about the impact of the current world. And obviously, COVID has remained and is front of mind on companies and on leadership and on how do you engage with people. Will it ever be the same? Is culture more important than ever today? And we're also going to talk about the impact of the stresses, the impact of COVID on organizations, on their people, not only their leaders, but their employees and staff, and the blurring of home and work and family, and has working from home, for example, impacted more on women in the workplace as mothers and providers, and many times having to keep the home fed versus males. We're going to talk about the impact of bricks and mortar. So are the days of bricks and mortar as part of an organization gone? We've got a fantastic panel. So let me kick off, and let me just also say, as Howard mentioned, please post your questions in the Q&A. And those are probably some of the most important and valuable questions. So please post them up, and we'll endeavor to ask them all. And so to get on to our panel, I'm first going to just, top right, I'm going to introduce Richard Sutton. And some of you may have seen him on previous webinars. I know Richard, I think in the early webinars about personal health and wellness and how do you look after yourself. I know you've been on a couple of our webinars. Many of you may have seen Richard gracing the sidelines of some of the Grand Slams. You've looked after Kevin Anderson, Maria Sharapova. I think you've done some work with Lee Na, and you're an author of 2 books now, which we'll talk to in a moment. So Richard, welcome. And we look forward to getting your insights into stress and what companies need to do and to leaders. Greg, a recipient of a South African Jewish Report Achievers Award, I think 2 years ago, if I'm correct. You received an award. So welcome, CEO of McDonald's and the leader of 16,000 people across the country, playing a role in keeping us fed. So we'll hear from you specifically on the ground as the CEO of an organization, as some of your challenges as a leader and what you've done to keep your people engaged. Amanda Porter, who I know is also no stranger to our webinars and to the Jewish Report, head of culture at Discovery. And so we're going to be looking to you to unravel the mystery of culture and the critical importance of culture in an organization, and maybe also just to give us some tips on how companies, whether they 12,000 people companies or 16,000 people companies, or they just small companies with 8 and 10 people, how you can define your culture. And we've got Karen Milner, who is the Associate Professor of Organisational Psychology at the University of the Witwatersrand. So it always sounds a little more prestigious than just saying Wits. So Karen, welcome. And I know that we'll talk about it in a moment, but you're also about to release your first book, co-author. So we'll hear a little bit about what the book's about. And from what I read of the topic, it's going to be very, very topical this evening. So welcome to all of you, and we look forward to a great webinar. Amanda, I'm going to kick off with you. The quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," was coined by Peter Drucker, a very well-known management consultant who's been around for many, many, many years. And so I wanted to ask you, tell us what culture is, and tell us why it is so important for any company, whether you're Discovery, whether you're McDonald's, whether you're a small printing business or whatever. Why is culture important, and especially now in our current times?
Thanks, Herschel. Thank you to the Jewish Report for having me as a panelist. And just I feel very honored to be here. And congratulations to the Jewish Report. 75 webinars. It's just astounding, and what you've done for the community is really incredible. So thank you for your input. Actually, that's culture. What you've done for the community is created a tremendous culture. And so I almost feel like the Jewish Report could be discussing this. But what is culture, and why is it so important? Look, culture's always existed. You walk into a shul, you walk into a school, you walk into a place of work, and you can feel something about those places. That's culture. What you're feeling, how it makes you feel, is the culture of the organization or whatever it is. What we've realized perhaps over the years is that it's not so much that there is a culture. There's always going to be a culture, but how impactful that culture is, how impactful it is on the ability to attract top talent, how impactful it is on the ability to retain that talent, to create happiness within an organization, and ultimately, therefore, to have the outputs and the impact that the organization is willing to have. And so it's with that in mind that suddenly you see Samantha Goshal is talking about the smell of the place, and Simon Sinek is talking to the why factor, and Michael Porter and Mark Kramer are talking to shared value and purpose. It's because what we've realized is the impact that culture can have on an organization, and the extent to which it drives then the outputs of that organization. I think what you've also seen over the years driving culture, or this focus on culture perhaps, and resulting in the statement that culture eats strategy for breakfast, is that businesses have become increasingly complex. Those days of very linear supply and demand, simple type businesses are over. There's so many unpredictabilities and uncertainties. You can't manage linearly. And so when you have to solve very complex problems, the only way to do it really is to draw on who you are as an organization and what it is that you're trying to achieve. Add to the mix the fact that the workforce is multi-generational with multiple needs and wants, and managing people today has its own complexity. And so, having a shared system of values, which is what culture becomes, is really the way to navigate that. And then I think over the last year, what you've certainly seen is that there's a shift, or perhaps a demand on business to have a social consciousness about them, that you can't just operate in isolation. You have to it's an awakening to look at the world around you and try and understand how you fit into the society in which you operate, and how you can contribute to that society, to the planet, to the world around you. And in each of those elements, whether it's the complexity of business, whether it's navigating the complexity of a multi-generational workforce, whether it's trying to put across a purposeful conscious capitalism, as they call it, culture is certainly the driving factor. That's really what's in a sense pushing this demand on culture. Hirsch, I don't think that there's any question around whether culture is important today. I think everybody knows that culture is important. I think people are really geared around this idea of culture. The question that I'm getting more and more frequently is, how do you do it? How do you implement culture? How do you get a culture ingrained into an organization? And I think that that's a very important question, because the theory's there's no doubt that culture is incredibly impactful. But the question is really around how you actually implement it. And I think that to answer that question, there are probably two starting points for organizations, big or small, individual or many. I think that the starting point is certainly to define what your culture is. And that means define your core purpose, your vision, your goal, your dream, your why factor, as Simon Sinek calls it, and then define your set of values. That's your how you're going to achieve it is a set of values. Your vision or your core purpose is not that age-old mission statement that sits on a plaque on a wall somewhere obscure, you know. Your vision is really a very succinct core purpose that kind of sets a vision, you know, that kind of says, this is our dream. And then your values are the rules of the game. How are we going to play? And I think that's the starting point. I mean, as I'm sure as we go through the discussion around the webinar, you know, we can discuss further. I don't want to talk for too long, but I think that is the starting point. The question that people are asking more and more is not whether culture is important. They know that. It's how do we implement it? And it's a very deliberate process.
Fantastic, thank you. And Karen, I'm gonna move to you. Once again, I want to just, so culture is one. I want to unpack the word organizational psychology. Tell us what organizational psychology is, and talk to us about how organizational psychology impacts on companies. Who does it talk to? And how does it overlay with culture?
Okay, thanks. So organizational psychology, very simply, is just the application of psychological principles and psychological methods to the workplace. It comes out of, and many people on this call may be more familiar with the term industrial psychology. When I trained, and for many years, we used to use the term industrial psychology. We've moved to organizational because of the kind of overly sense of being in industry. So we've moved to organizational. My personal preference actually is that we should move to work psychology, or the psychology of work, because we don't only operate in organizations, we don't only operate in profit-making organizations, we really do deal with the psychology of work. So that's technically what organizational psychology is. For people watching from overseas, in America, it's termed I/O psychology, but that's such a terrible mouthful, I never use it. And it's really, it's an amalgamation of for me psychology. A lot of universities teach organizational psychology in commerce faculties. We teach it in humanities, and we teach it as psychology because we see ourselves as psychologists first. We see our role as dealing with humans and human well-being as our priority. So although we have a lot of, we work at a corporate, and there's been quite a lot of criticism of organizational psychology, in fact, as being too managerialist, too focused on profits, too focused on organizations. Many of us in the field are trying to move away from that perspective of organizational psychology to a psychology that really looks at ensuring that the term I always use is first do no harm. We're fortunate. What we do know is that when you treat people well, and when you give people good work and you give them dignified work, that has a positive outcome for the organization. But if that were not true, our responsibility would still be first and foremost to the psychology and to people. So if we found that sweatshops were the best way of motivating people, that's not something that we would teach. But we're fortunate. We know, and the research reinforces it again and again and again. Give people good work, give them dignified work, treat them well, treat them with dignity, give them purpose, and that's going to be good for them, and it's going to be good for the company. So that's organizational psychology.
Sorry, you're about to release a book. It's entitled Beyond Tea and Tissues, Protecting and Promoting Mental Health at Work. I think you're releasing it on the 25th of March. It's co-authored with another psychologist. I think it's being released by Knowledge Resources. Talk to us a little bit about the content of the book. What's the book about, and who does it talk to?
So thanks very much. So in many years of both academia, people approaching me, I ran a counseling clinic at Wits for many years. I do a lot of consulting to organizations, and we found over the years, I found that two things. The first is it's often managers' worst nightmare having to deal with employees who are struggling with their mental health. And that's where the title of the book came from. Is a human resource manager once said to me, you know, people coming here crying and all I can offer them is tissues and tea. So the idea of the book is to be able to offer people, both the employees and the managers having to deal with them, a really useful set of ways of offering more than just tissues and tea. First, for employees who are in distress. Secondly, for employees who might be coming into the workplace with mental health problems. But we know that if you that work really does help to keep people psychologically healthy. So to try and help and support people like that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, to really help people to thrive. So we're not only looking at a kind of dysfunction model of saying, don't be depressed. We deal with that in the book, but we also go right to the other end of the spectrum to say the opposite end of depression is actually not being depressed. The opposite end of depression is engagement, it's vigor, it's enthusiasm. So we try to take the book across those two perspectives. And the other thing that I noticed is that you get organizational psychologists operating in silos. They understand the organizational context and the way the organization impacts individuals. And you get clinical psychologists who operate on an individual basis and a counseling and therapeutic basis. And so I really felt that there was a need to have a cross-disciplinary approach on this. So I partnered with a very well-known psychologist in Johannesburg called Judith Ensa, a very wise psychologist, clinical psychologist. So in the book, you really do get this crossover of an understanding of the organizational context and how that impacts on employees, but also the individual clinical context as well.
Fantastic, thank you. So I'm going to lead Richard into you, because interesting, you've spoken about your book around how work and keeping yourself busy is part of keeping and improving your mental health. And Richard, I'm going to lead that into you. Great to see you again. And you've just released a new book called Stressproof, the Game Plan. And I'm going to ask Danny just to bring up a picture of the book and post in the chat column where we can get the book. It's your second book. And I'm going to ask you just to talk about stress, because a lot of your book, and it's obviously gives solutions, we'll talk a little bit about that later, is just the impact of stress on organizations, the impact of stress on people, and the impact of stress on employees, and especially in the South African context. So I'm going to kick off with you in terms of where do organizations find themselves today? Where do leaders find themselves today? Where do employees find themselves today? And in South Africa, are these factors more severe just because of the stressful environment in which we live?
So firstly, I'd like to say a big congratulations to the Jewish Report for so many successful webinars and everything that you guys are doing. It's really incredible, and I feel very privileged to be part of this. And congratulations to Karen on her upcoming book. I'm looking forward to reading it. To weigh in on this question, I think it's really complex, and I think we've all been really grappling with challenges that we were unprepared for. If you look at the landscape at the moment, the broader landscape, which is fundamentally a combination between the fourth industrial revolution entrenching itself in our lives and in society, as compounded by COVID-19. We're seeing just a high prevalence of employment insecurity, high prevalence than almost ever before. We're seeing the future of jobs has become very unstable. There was a study by researchers at Oxford a couple of years ago looking at the future of 702 jobs over a 10-year period and how many of them will still exist. And the research team used exceptional modeling, and basically the conclusion of the study was that 47% of those jobs, or the jobs that we're currently involved in, will not exist. We also have the loneliness factor, which has escalated, and we always have this assumption that loneliness affects older populations more than younger populations, but most of the new research coming out is showing that the generations, Generation Z and the millennials, are far harder hit from a loneliness standpoint and disconnect standpoint. The older generations, despite the fact that there's social media and despite the fact that there's all these kind of technological platforms, which really talks to the fact that so much of human communication is not digital, it's not vocal, it's not auditory, it's really, there's something that exists between us that we don't really or fully understand. We then have this rising health insecurity. For many decades, we just had this incredibly positive trajectory in terms of human health and life expectancy. And now what we're seeing is a radical shift where there's this rising prevalence of chronic diseases. We've got COVID-19, which is creating an enormous burden on our healthcare systems. But talking to Karen's point is that mental health has become one of the prevailing issues in the world today. And if you look at the stats in Europe, we'll see that it'll show you that 1 in 3 individuals in the EU at the moment are suffering from multiple mental health disorders. If you're looking at stats within South Africa, within the workforce, so this is employed individuals, we're looking at around 1 in 4 individuals being diagnosed and having to be treated or having been treated for depression. We also know that the States and the UK are also grappling with similar statistics. So mental health and that health insecurity piece is really becoming one of those forefront issues. We've got financial pressure. I don't think anyone's exempt from this. We've got growing inequality, rising poverty, the recalibration of work, moving to this gig economy. You've got skills instability. There was a World Economic Forum report that was published about 2 years ago looking at the skills that we have now and are they going to be relevant in the future. And they basically found or discovered and put in the report that we're going to actually have to, 50% of the workforce is going to have to reskill within the next 4 years. So this is the landscape that we're confronted with, and this is relentless. It's every single day, all the time. We're feeling some of these pressures, and it's driving is more fear and more uncertainty. And we know what the consequences of fear and uncertainty is. We have compromise to multiple systems, so it can materialize in emotional fragility or vulnerability. It can result in mental and cognitive decline. It can result in physical decline. The big systems that are hit by this relentless wave of stress are fundamentally the digestive system, the immune system, and the nervous system. So we're looking at 3 major systems that have a direct bearing on our health and well-being and all being affected. Now, the question is, how is it affecting the workforce? How is it affecting us? How is it affecting basically society? And what we know is that in the presence of mental health issues, there's a radical reduction in productivity, and it's not by choice. So if you're suffering from mild depression, the research shows that you're looking at about a 30% reduction in productivity, which equates to around 5.5 hours a day as opposed to 8. And if you take that over a period of years, it's about 2 months less work, despite the fact you're sitting at your desk and you're in front of your computer and you're really trying to put material out and trying to be creative and innovative. But at the same time, if you're physically compromised, your commitment drops, your output drops, destructive behaviors start to entrench, dynamism becomes compromised, creativity, agility, presenteeism, this coming to work disconnected, disengaged, disinterested, it starts becoming more prevalent. And the burden is not just on an organization, it's not just on society, it's a combined burden on individuals and organizations and society, both in the human cost and in the economic space. So we're really sitting with this very complex set. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we change this trajectory? We certainly can't do anything about the times that we live in. Where do we go from here? Are we going to be able to create more employment security? I don't think so. Are we going to be able to create more health security? It's going to take time. Are we going to be able to eliminate and reduce the financial pressure, the inequality that exists? Not for some time. So I think a lot of the challenges that we're facing are not going away. And what we can change is not what's happening now and what's happened in the past, but our path towards the future. And this really fundamentally requires leadership. If you want to change this environment that we're living in and we exist in a profound and meaningful way, it's going to take a handful of exceptional leaders to take the charge. And if you look at the past, the past leadership was very, very much in an organizational context defined as looking after the interests of the business and looking at industry issues and how to position yourself and calibrate yourself within a changing and adapting economy. But now what's the expectation is far broader, and Amanda pointed or certainly alluded to this, and Karen alluded to this, is that a leader's role is far more expansive now. You've got to weigh in on employee health and wellness, but fundamentally a business is based on your employees' skills and abilities and the time that they're willing to invest. And if they're not healthy and they're not well, they can't be investing that time and the skills that they have and growing the business and creating an innovation hub and so on. So we have this new brand, this new set of demands and requirements for leaders that have to be acknowledged. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a leader right at the top. It's all levels of leadership. In fact, leadership is not about a title. It transcends title. Leadership is about actions and values. And we all fundamentally leaders. We all have to weigh in on each other's well-being and health. But then the new kind of mandate for organizational leadership also requires that you weigh in on political events. You can't stay quiet anymore. National challenges. COVID-19 is a good example of that. At the same time, you're dealing with a workforce where pessimism is growing. If you look at South African statistics now, 1 in 3 people in South Africa believe that we're not going to be in a great position in the next 5 years. So now you've got to be able to inject optimism, but not diminishing the fact that things are tough at the moment. So there's this whole, I mean, I could carry on for the next 45 minutes, but my point is that this is a very complex topic, and I think that we need a very concrete strategic approach in order for successful management going forward.
So we're going to come and talk about optimism and leaders and the reality of the situation. Greg, I'm going to move to you, and I'm going to ask Danny just to play a video clip that you, one of the video clips that you had sent to me about how you had engaged over the last nearly 12 months with your McDonald's family. So Danny, if I could ask you to play that audio clip.
Well, hello, McDonald's family. I'm so excited to be talking to you today. I'm excited because we are now in level 3, and that means for us as a brand, McDonald's, we can open drive-through and takeaway and keep delivery. This means that most of us will return to work. Now, we're still under limited shifts, so it won't be all of us, but it'll certainly be most of us. But it does have a bittersweet type of story to it. Most of us will be returning to work, but what level 3 has done is it's created a lot of mobility. We're going to be moving from home. Our children are going to be going back to school. We're going to be returning back to the office. And with that mobility brings a high risk of infection or a high risk of getting infected. Now, the only way that we can prevent this is to being disciplined like we've never been disciplined before, to adhere to health and safety procedures and standards like we've never ever done before. Washing hands, wearing face masks, sanitizing on a regular basis, and making sure that we are staying 1.5 meters away from each other. It's called social distancing. This way we can protect each other and we can protect this great brand. Now, we are as strong as our weakest link. It just takes one restaurant, one person to do something incorrect, some form of media to capture us on a video. We're going to find a new challenge in our business, and that is congestion. We may not have the huge volume in our organizations like it used to be in 2019, but the congestion is going to be a congestion like that you've never experienced before. We're going to have delivery people that are standing in our lobby. We're going to have customers that normally sit down in our lobby standing and waiting for their food. We're going to have drive-through around the corner. So how we manage congestion is very, very important. And so I look to you as leaders of this business to make sure that we manage this in a very controlled way, and we make sure that we manage it in a social distancing way. We've been in lockdown for 66 days now, and I'm sure many of you are frustrated just like me. But for many communications, I've been saying to you, stay home and stay safe. I now have the privilege to say, welcome back to the restaurants, McDonald's family. But remember to stay safe too.
Apologies, I've got a bit of feedback, so I need to keep muting myself. Greg, so I want to, before we talk about the actual video and engaging with your team, I wanted to just talk to you about the culture of McDonald's. I'm not sure to what degree you can talk to us about the culture of McDonald's and how important has that culture been in holding a family of 16,000 people dispersed across the country, hundreds of stores, hundreds of geographic locations. And what have you had to do to hold that culture together from where you were 12 or 15 months ago to where we are today?
Thank you very much, Herschel. I just want to make sure you can hear me. So look, there's so much said already. So before we get into a practical example, I often ask my team, we look at our long-term strategy every 3 years. And I ask them this one simple question, that if we don't sell hamburgers, if we don't sell coffee, if we don't sell French fries, what would we do? Who would we want to be? And what would we want to be known for? And I guess that sort of gives us our mission statement, which I'll read to you now. It's to be a positive force to our customers, our people, our communities, and our world. It's to be a training institution that gives young people a start. It's to impact people's lives, our own employees' lives positively. It's to be known as a good business, a good brand who does good things. Now, we often talk about that culture is the way we do things here, and strategy is more around how we play the game, or strategy is a sequence of choices. But I think we first got to understand what culture is not. What culture is not. Culture is not a whole bunch of like people doing the same thing. A whole bunch of like people with the same skills, all aligned, walking in a straight line, a whole bunch of people with the same preferences. Instead, culture is actually about diversity. It's about positive discomfort. It's about debate. It's about transformation. And what knits us together as a rainbow nation, be it in our community, be it in our family, be it in our businesses, is that silver lining of beliefs, of purpose, of values. Now, sometimes we confuse ourselves because we write big manuals of values and big manuals of purpose. And I guess sometimes it's also one or two things, just one or two things. Just think about our core families, my wife and my kids, then my community, and then the country, and then our business. Just think about those things. We're so different in our different ways, but there's 3 or 4 things that unite us. And I guess that's where values and cultures plays its game. It's for McDonald's, I'll just throw a few words out to you without telling what it is. It's about serving. It's about inclusion. It's about integrity. It's about community. It's about family. We're very much a family culture with all the kids in our business. But for me, deviating a little bit into a little bit of leadership and how we stayed connected with our people, communication is absolutely paramount. But we'll go there when we go there in leadership. Back to you, Herschel.
And so just talk to me. So we locked down. We've been in and out of a full lockdown, a half lockdown. Your staff go home. They come back. Richard spoke about this relationship of trust, the uncertainty around job security, the uncertainty around whether people are going to have their jobs, whether they're going to be able to go back to work. As an organization, how have you, or as a leader, how have you helped your staff deal with that uncertainty that we've had and just seems to be sort of nagging all the time in your organization?
Well, at the end of the day, we can get very technical. So we're lucky enough in McDonald's to have our own Twitter feed or our own Facebook. It's actually more like a Twitter. It's actually called the Culture app. It's called Culture. So when you look at it on your phone, all 16,000 people are on there. So it gives me a very direct read to be able to communicate to the people. And so I started communicating with selfie videos. We didn't want to show any of our viewers those videos from my home, from my balcony. I started making Big Macs and hamburgers from my own kitchen and started communicating to my people, because there was one thing that the team needed to hear from me during this particular time. And thank goodness I was in connection. I was contacting them in their homes through this particular mobile phone. There was one thing, and that wasn't culture. And well, maybe it was, and it certainly wasn't strategy. It was to make them feel safe. And safety comes with knowledge. So it's not so much how much time you spend with somebody. It's often the frequency that builds a relationship, the frequency that builds trust. and the frequency that ultimately builds alignment. And there was many difficult messages that I had to give to the team. But through these little 1-minute video calls, they can see my expression, they can see my body language. It's not just a cold email. And then obviously the communication unlocks that uncertainty and that unfear. So communication absolutely determines our relationships. You know, Herschel, we cannot not communicate during crisis because everything sends a message. And very important, today we're on a webinar and we're communicating broadly to thousands of people. But the value of listening is probably the most important thing of leading during these times. You know, as CEOs, we train for these times. This is match time for us, and great CEOs will succeed, and the poor CEOs that aren't prepared will fail. And so I'd spend a lot of time having groups of 10 people talking to me and listening to them, because my one idea is probably pales compared to their 10 brilliant ideas. So to answer your original question, when you started off this webinar, does culture eat strategy? Absolutely, culture eats strategy, and it's certainly your competitive advantage.
Herschel, may I interrupt with a few questions that have come in via YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and a few other places. The one question, and I think this is probably posed for Amanda, and that is, we've seen Silicon Valley, places like Google and Facebook, their culture is very much a young, dynamic culture. It's about sleep pods, and it's about free lunches, and it's about massaging. And is that actually, are those perks, or is that inherent to the culture of the organization? And maybe a question that to pose to Professor Karen Milner is, what motivates people? In the old days, people thought it was money that motivates people. If you're trying to get the most out of your staff, should you be paying them more money, or are there other ways that you can really achieve greater motivation through encouragement, through recognition, through non-monetary means? What is it that people today are looking for? And is there a generational thing between an older generation, maybe more steeped in pure economics, and younger generation who maybe are looking for something else in order to motivate them?
Thanks, Howard. So to the question around the Googles and the Apples and the Facebooks and all their wonderful, you know, devices that they use, the truth is that actually I remember that Google won the best company to work for years ago. I think the year was 2007, but I stand to be corrected. They won it because of the Googleplex and the free food and all the roller skates and skateboards and whatever else that they had running around the Googleplex. And a few years later, they won it again. They won the best company to work for again. But this time they won it because they had started something called unconscious bias workshops. And I think that shift that you see in Google alone has happened throughout. It's not enough to just, in fact, I don't even think it's anything at all, to have the free food in the Googleplex. What people are looking for is something far more profound than that. They're looking for purpose. And they're wanting to know that the value that they add has meaning, and that the job that they're doing is going to have impact. They're looking for collaboration, to work in teams, to work with people, to be able to learn, to be able to move very quickly within organizations, but they're not necessarily looking to stay within those organizations. They'll stay insofar as the organization offers them a sense of purpose and meaning and an ability to have impact and make a difference. I think, Greg, I mean, watching that video, Greg, and some of the things that you're talking about is 100% spot on around the communication. What people are looking for is connection. And that's the importance of leadership today, is that we have to be deliberate in creating culture. It doesn't just happen. Well, it will happen, but then you won't get necessarily the desired culture that you want. If you want a particular desired culture, you have to be deliberate in creating that culture. And so to give you an example, you know, whenever I present externally to Discovery, I always ask people, give me one word that describes Discovery. Like when you think of Discovery as an organization, after you've gotten over the fact that maybe we might not have paid your claim, and if we haven't, just please send it to me and we'll sort it out. But once you've gotten past that, okay, give me one word that describes discovery. What is the word? What is the word that comes to mind? And invariably the word that I get is innovative, creative, pioneers, you know, game changers, disruptors. And I always say, how did you know? How do people who don't work for us know? They haven't been through my 5-day boot camp induction process. How do they know that we are innovative? How do that's one of our values? How do they know that? And the reason they know that is because we've created touch points for innovation. We've been deliberate about creating a space where people have to innovate, where people are encouraged to innovate, not for innovation's sake, but purposeful innovation. And we've done that with each of the desired outcomes that we want. And similarly today, Howie, to your question, you know, it's about understanding where people are at and what they want and that drive for purpose, and then creating those important touch points for people to connect, you know, creating those touch points. So I love what Greg said about the videos and the 1 minute. I know Barry Schwartzberg gave a demo on how he baked challah, and he actually did a demo on baking challah for people. It's so personal. It's so authentically human. And that's the connection that people are looking for. You know, they're looking for that authentic humanity that exists in all of us. And that's what we're striving to create through culture.
I think maybe just to add to that, because, you know, there may be a lot of people listening who are running small businesses, and Greg, your point also, and Amanda, as you said, you know, these are not fancy production videos. You know, you were on your balcony doing a selfie video with your iPhone or Barry baking challah. So, you know, wherever you are, it's about that connection, that authenticity. And even if it's just a 1 minute clip in your lounge or on your balcony, that's what the point of this is to connect and engage in an authentic way.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Amanda used this word authenticity. I think that's important because it's believable, it's real. And that authenticity sits in. Can you imagine if I would have said McDonald's is all about innovation? You know, it won't necessarily ring a bell. We're a food business, and we got to find something that touches our consumers' hearts, but that external brand and the internal brand has to merge. It's quite important. It starts with a single message. For us, it's quality, service, cleanliness, and value. And I think if anyone on this webinar walked into a McDonald's tomorrow and asked somebody, what does QSC and V stand for? They'll be able to tell you. So often, the more powerful thing is to align an organization of 16,000 people around one thing. That's more powerful than anything else, than trying to have some sort of complicated sort of item. But I want to deviate, if I can, just for 1 minute, Herschel, into how this relates almost into communication and almost into leadership. So Herschel, I want you to choose somebody in your mind, anyone. Don't tell us who it is. I want you to rate that person out of 10 on how much you trust that person. Could be a family member, could be a person you spoke to over Shabbos, it could be a business thing that happened on Thursday. How much you trust them, where 10 is outstanding and 1 is terrible. And then I want you to pick that same person and rate that person on how much you respect them. So I've got my person 8 and 8. You've got your person. You got your score, Herschel?
Yeah.
I want you to multiply those 2 scores together. 8 and 8 is 64. Don't tell us what the score is. But the moral of the story over here is that if you didn't score over 75, this is just a Greg maths thing, over 75%, then that person's not influential in your life as a leader. But the deeper moral of the story is not about what you rate people. It's about what people rate you. And so you deliver trust, or you give trust, or you earn trust by delivering on your promise. And respect by teaching somebody something new today. So as leaders, our job is quite simple. As cultural ambassadors of our organization, because the fish rots from the top. The culture has to start with me. It has to start with anyone in a family, in a community, is to be able to deliver on our promise and teach somebody something new. And this world would be a different place. And our culture will emerge and it will blossom.
Fantastic. Howie, I think you had a question for Professor Milner earlier. You're on mute, Howie.
the question for Karen was, what motivates people today? Is it all about money, or are there other things? And is there a generational thing that comes in? Are younger people more motivated by acceptance and stroking, while older people may look for money? And if we can throw one that's just come in for Richard as well, and it's from someone who says, I'm the CEO of a business, I need to lead, but I'm often so stressed out of my mind by what's happening around. How do I go and project this image to my staff and lead, where I personally don't feel, I'm a person and a human as well, I don't feel inside what I have to project to my entire team?
Thanks, Howard. Should I just go straight into it? So it's a complex question. The issue of motivation hasn't, it's probably one of the biggest researched areas in my field, and it hasn't entirely been answered. But I think for the purposes of, I'm going to go back to an old theorist, which captures, I think, really answers this question. And a guy called Hertzberg, who said that there are two types of things that happen in an organization. And he said there are hygiene factors and there are motivators. And I really love the word hygiene factors because I think it's really important. He says money is a hygiene factor. We can't, it's easy to dismiss the importance of money, and it's particularly easy for privileged people who have money to dismiss the importance of money. Money is a hygiene factor. You can't be healthy, okay, if you don't have enough money. You can't be healthy at work, you can't be motivated, you can't function effectively if you don't have the amount of money that you need to meet your needs. So I'm not somebody who quickly dismisses the role of money in the workplace. It's important, but it's a hygiene factor. It stops us from being demotivated, and it stops us from getting physically, psychologically, and a whole lot of other ways ill. It's not a motivator, and that's what Hertzberg spoke about quite a lot. All that more money will do is it's not going to turn you from somebody who is demotivated to somebody who's incredibly engaged and motivated. And for that, Hertzberg spoke about what he called motivators and what subsequent people have called intrinsic factors. And I'm just going to share one quick experiment that was done, because that's much more recent than old Hertzberg. And that was Ryan and Desi did an amazing experiment. They started it with a group of kids, and then they did it with adults as well. And they asked them to play. They asked them to do a puzzle, something that was fun. And the first time they asked them to do it, the kids loved it and were motivated and just did it. And the second time they asked them to do it, they gave them a reward for finishing it. Now, what's quite interesting is that sometimes, I have to say, and it's been done, numerous experiments have been done, when they offered the reward, occasionally productivity would go up. Okay, money is not nothing. But the intrinsic motivation, the fun, the joy, the purpose was gone. The only reason those people did the puzzle, they'd done it initially with no reward, they'd done it for the intrinsic joy and the pleasure of doing it. As soon as he added an external motivator, as soon as he added a reward to that intrinsic motivator, the whole point of the intrinsic motivator went away. So my answer to that is, don't dismiss the importance of money, particularly for people who don't have enough of it. But in the end, it's not what's going to create the engaged, motivated employee needs the kind of thing that Greg and Amanda have been talking about. It's about meaning. Control is very important. Autonomy is very important. Connection is very important, and feeling valued. Those are the factors that really shift away from just this hygiene, not being demotivated, through to motivation. The second question on generations is quite a controversial one. I think you'll find a big difference between what people outside academia say and what the research is finding. So I've just finished a piece of research now where we looked at this in South Africa. So the whole idea that different generations have different values and motives comes out of, again, a sociologist who said that people who have experienced the same events in their formative years will view the world in fairly similar ways and will ask for things, the similar kinds of things out of the world. Similarly, if something has kind of fundamentally shifted in the world while they were growing up, again, that will shape the way they view the world. And from there, we got these whole ideas that there are distinct generations. The research isn't supporting that 100%, because it's very difficult to differentiate between this kind of, your baby boomers and when they end, and your generation X's and generation Y's, and baby boomers were just so enormous and had such an impact in such a fundamentally changed world. And I think it's important to remember that when we think about how COVID will change the world. I think it will create a different view and a different way of viewing the world. But some of those changes are simply age-related. And we need to recognize that as well, that older people are looking to retirement. Perhaps it's not just because they're baby boomers and greedy, it's because they're coming to the end of their careers and are having to think about whether they've got enough money to live on, given how much longer we're living these days, if they're retiring at 65 and are likely to live well into their 90s. So I hesitate to say it's a generational thing. Having said that, I do think the world has moved where people are looking far more closely at social purpose. I think Amanda also touched on that, on the kind of triple bottom line. I think that younger employees in organizations are looking to make a difference. I'm not that fussed about whether or not that's a generational thing or whether they'll change and get cynical like the rest of us as they get older. And the reality is that that's what they want, and I think it's great. And I do think that within that context, again, money is not going to be the prime motivator.
Okay. And so, Richard, I want to just the question that Howard posed to you, because I know in your book you talk about some of the things that leaders have to do, and you specifically mentioned the words radiate enthusiasm and optimism. And I can tell you just from a personal experience, so we send out a Mindset Monday to our company every Monday, and I think it goes out into the public. And this last Monday was around exude positivity. And I remember, I don't choose them, I remember looking at this Mindset Monday and feeling exactly that, this, to be able to exude positivity as a leader. And we're going to get into leadership when maybe you're not feeling that positive yourself. How do you overcome that? What do you do?
So I think that's a lot of people are struggling with that at this point in time. Whoever you are, I think that you have been impacted, as I mentioned earlier. And where we were a year ago was in a position where, regardless of your degree of responsibility to others, whether it's family or an organization or community, you could take a tactical approach to your personal stress management. So if you weren't feeling that great, if you're feeling a little bit anxious or worried, or you weren't sleeping well, or you weren't concentrating, you were unmotivated, you'd exercise a little bit more, watch your diet a little bit more, and that would generally be sufficient in order to overcome that state that you were in. The time that we're living in now is vastly different. It's relentless. And we've been in this movie now for going on 1 year. It's likely to be a marathon. It's not going to stop at this point. And all the aftermath is going to be experienced going forward. And I think a lot of people are realizing that, and that's why so many people have come into 2021 in this very dark space, in a very challenged space. And now we're having this narrative saying we've got to do more for others, and we've got to support others, and we've got to help others. And we ourselves are barely coping. We're either feeling burnt out or demotivated or emotionally fragile or vulnerable. So to answer the question that one of the participants asked was, how does one go about this? And this is where I'm going to invert the whole concept, is where strategy is the best approach, as opposed to with culture, where culture surpasses strategy. In a personal context, strategy is highly effective. And one has to take a position where you are going to be experiencing this degree of pressure, these demands, these expectations, these responsibilities, these uncertainties, and one's personal health, emotional, physical, and mental is critical. And in order to secure one's personal health, it's not simply about exercise. One has to take a much deeper dive, and that deeper dive involves 4 parts. So there's 4 elements in order to safeguard our health during very difficult times, and we're in that phase right now. The first is really changing one's mindset. Now, changing one mindset really basically involves looking at the circumstances we confront with, saying that I can't really control it, but I can control the path that I move in a direction, or the direction that I'm going in my destination. And it is basically saying that I'm going to use the stresses and the challenges as a means of growth and a means of adaptation. I'm going to use all the stress responses, the whole biological shift that happens in response to our fears and uncertainties actually helps us overcome adversity. And I'm going to use that to an advantage. I'm going to not see it as a negative, but rather view it as a growth lever. Now, by doing it, that simple shift, there was 3 Harvard studies showed that simple shift can change your neurochemistry. So ultimately what happens, or fundamentally what happens when you take that position, saying that I'm not dismissing the challenges of the time, diminishing the effects on me and the people around me, but I'm got the buck stops now. I'm going to use it as an advantage. And how does that change in neurochemistry? You have raised dopamine and raised norepinephrine, which helps with motivation, focus, clarity, agility, and so on. So that's the first step. And you'll find when you start diving into studies on very successful Olympic athletes who've overcome extremely difficult circumstances and stood on that podium holding up a gold medal, this is the fundamental basis of their success. So they say that the challenges were part of the creation of their successes. In fact, most of our most difficult times are the genesis of our success. So step 1 is mindset. The second step is our behavior. If we start adjusting our behavior, we start looking at the way we relate to the world differently when in a stressful situation or under stressful conditions, it changes our biology. What typically happens in society today is that we expect it to be strong, and we expect it to be successful, and we expect it to be impenetrable. Something that's almost completely unrealistic. And Greg pointed it out earlier, this vulnerability. Karen, Amanda, everyone's talked about this vulnerability factor. But society up until this point now, up until recently, has been very intolerant of failure, weakness, and lack of success. So what we generally do from a historic standpoint or a patterning standpoint is we go into a proverbial corner. So when we get stressed, we introvert and we introspect and we go in that corner, and we come out only when we feel stronger and we've got something to offer the world, or that's what we believe is necessary. But the reality is that what made us strong historically, what made human beings so successful up until this point in history, was the fact that every time we had a challenge, we came together, we galvanized, we united. This is a fundamental strength. And this is a time where it's very hard, because we're so disconnected, to really put together this type of strategic approach where we reach out the minute there's a crisis. We're so disconnected that it's hard to react. Who do we reach out to, and how do we express this? Now, the benefit of reaching out and showing more care and more compassion, more support and more empathy, and really sharing one's experience, is that you release a hormone called oxytocin, and copious amounts of this hormone. Now, this hormone's fundamental role within our psychological set is to diminish all the negative effects of cortisol and adrenaline. So fundamentally what we're seeing is the fear gets translated into fearlessness. The self-esteem, the drop in self-esteem and the lowered self-esteem gets transformed into confidence. Oxytocin is the most incredible molecule. And the more we connect, and the more we share, and the more we express our vulnerabilities, the more we have this resilience to the times that we're confronted with. The third step in the model is really simple, is the biggest challenge of our time is uncertainty. You can take all these independent stresses, and when you put them all together and say, what is the prevailing experience? Uncertainty. And the interesting thing about our biological response to stress is that it's typically governed by hormonal reactions, but we have an override button, which means you can turn stress off from a biological state or perspective anytime you want to. It's literally up to you. The system's known as the vagus nerve. The chemical that's released is acetylcholine. And the minute we activate that nerve, we start calming down our system. It takes 30 seconds to 60 seconds in order to almost recalibrate. Now, the activities that will
so Richard,
stimulate...
let me just ask you, so what would be, so just in simple terms, if I'm looking at this motivational quote that I'm expected to live around exude positivity, and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, how am I going to walk into my office this morning exuding positivity? What should I be doing? Should I be breathing? Should I be showing the vulnerability to my people? What are the practical things that I should be doing when I'm in the office?
So I think the practical things is really looking after oneself in a complete way. So shutting your stress down, looking after your health, changing your mindset, and changing your behavior. Step one, before you can even walk into that office and be optimistic. Otherwise, it's inauthentic. If you're not coping and you're projecting that everything is okay, you're diminishing the effects of your experiences and everyone else's. So that's an inauthentic experience. So step one is really guard one's own health, look after one's own health and well-being. But then at the same time, as once that's been achieved, you have to understand that everyone's feeling down and everyone's demotivated. And now what you're going to have to do is step in and say, okay, well, I'm going to project this and enthusiasm. But at the same time, it can't be this toxic form of happiness where you walk around with a smile on your face and everything in the world is falling down and the business is struggling and people you've had to retrench and restructure in a very negative way. So that's inauthentic, one, and two, it's really not what your role is. Your role is fundamentally in this optimism piece is to deliver hope, saying we acknowledge what's going on now, but we know it is going to be better, and this is what we're going to do about it. And this requires a certain degree of self-belief on your part, and that's why self-care is so important. It requires confidence on your part. That's why self-care is important. And you also have to start aligning yourself from a company values perspective. When people are attached to a value system and a purpose, it inspires them in a way that's almost immeasurable. So fundamentally, I think that's where one has to start and take it.
So I'm gonna lead into a Simon Sinek video, and Danny, I'm gonna ask you to post it up on leadership. We've spoken about organizations. I want to spend a little bit of time on leadership, and Danny, I'm gonna ask you to put up a 2-minute video clip on leadership and what leaders need to do.
Others don't. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So what's the most important thing for a leader to understand and be?
Fundamentally, a leader is like a parent. You know, just like a parent, we put the lives of our children before our own. We want them to grow up, become confident, and go on and achieve more than we could for ourselves. Leadership is exactly the same. You know, leaders are the ones who are willing to risk, when it matters, their own interests so that others may advance.
You said that it's really important, though, that you put your head and your heart into it. And that really, when you work together, you said nobody bonds over deadlines, they bond over camaraderie. And that's what people need to understand in a work environment. Bosses need to understand.
We are naturally cooperative animals. Our natural inclination is to trust and cooperate. But trust and cooperation are not instructions. I can't just tell you to trust me. And I can't simply tell two people, I want you guys to cooperate. Trust and cooperation are feelings produced by the environment in which we're working. And that environment is created by the leaders. And when we feel safe, when we feel that our leaders have our interests in mind, the natural reaction, the natural human reaction is we look out for each other, we work harder, we're more innovative, we offer our ideas and our best talents.
All of it sounds good, Simon, but companies need to make money.
They absolutely need to make money. And this is the great irony, right? This is the great irony, which is when our leaders put our interests first, we work harder and they make more money.
And you have a great example in why you called this book Leaders Eat Last. Tell us how you got that title.
It comes from a conversation I had with a Marine Corps general, Lieutenant General George Flynn, who actually wrote the foreword to the book. And I asked him, what makes the Marines so wonderful? And he said to me, officers eat last. And he's absolutely right. When you go to any chow hall anywhere in the world, you will see the Marines line up in rank order. Most junior first, most senior last. It's not in any rule book, and nobody tells them they have to. They do it because that's how they view leadership. We view leadership as a rank. They view it as a responsibility.
So how do you foster that in a work environment? How do you be a leader and foster that?
Create that culture.
Create that
So
culture.
leadership is a choice, just like becoming a parent is a choice. Having the child is the fun part. You know, it's the raising of the child that's the hard part. It's exactly the same. Starting the company, that's the fun, you know? But actually becoming the leader, choosing to put people's interests before your own, that's a choice.
So how did you begin?
First one.
Greg, I'm gonna ask you. So this balance between, and I think Richard, you mentioned in your book, between productivity, efficiency. Companies have got to make profit and making people feel safe in their environment, and especially today. Talk to me, how do leaders balance that? So, you know, people have been out of work, companies have been working, people need to be more productive, companies are cutting costs, companies are looking ways to be more efficient. And yet you're trying to do that in a way that preserves the culture and that continues to build and create that trust between the organization, you as the CEO, and your people.
Let me knit what Professor said and what Simon said to maybe one answer for those two questions. So we faced a major issue. Can you imagine? April, May, June, restaurants closed. 16,000 people go stay at home. Disaster. And we really haven't spoken about how disastrous COVID-19 really has been. We're talking quite sort of high level general, but under COVID-19 for a restaurant company, disastrous. So now I'm faced with retrenchments. I'm faced with retrenchments to help the bottom line. So we've got a choice. We can do it through the HC team, but we don't. We write a note to all 16,000 people in our communication and we say, guys, I've got a problem. What should we do? We're facing retrenchments. Can I have some ideas? And you know what the idea came back from? The idea came back is let all 16,000 people take a 20% salary cut for 6 months from 3 or 4 people. And so we took that idea, we socialized it, and we had about 3% of the people through a roll to say, we don't agree with that. 97% of the McDonald's people said, save our jobs and save our friends' jobs. And we will take, I mean, these are people earning 5, 6, 7, 10,000 Rand a month, taking a 20% cut. Unbelievable. So that's how you protect and you manage the bottom line. And that's how you humble yourself as a leader to know that the best ideas aren't going to come from you. You're not the decision maker necessarily. You're the unlocker. You're the unblocker. And that's what you need to be able to do. Another thing that Richard said, he's spot on about strategy, because strategy gives you a roadmap. It's like anything else, you know, it's like the Torah, it's like a Bible, it's like anything. It needs to give you direction. So what has COVID really done? COVID's taken what change we were going to experience in 10 years. What was going to happen in 2030 is happening in 2022. That's all it's done. Now, for businesses that had comprehensive strategies, comprehensive roadmaps, you had really thought about the fourth industrial revolution. You were digitalizing your business already. You'd understand what culture is. You understand what the fourth industrial revolution is and how to work with young people who don't want these long performance reviews and working with you on WhatsApp. Your recovery is going to be quicker, 1 to 2 years. For those companies that were stuck and pretty much old-fashioned, your recovery is going to be longer. So for those business people that are listening, I'm going a little bit too deep in business. For those of you that have got 1 year strategies and 2 year strategies, you need to think longer. You need to go 5 years and you need to go 10 years, because you can go back to your roadmap and you can say to the team, listen, we've been derailed for a year, but that's still the destination. Our destination's destination 400 restaurants, and everybody is moving towards that, even taking salary sacrifices to help us on the bottom line so we can grow again. So, you know, from that perspective, I want to, you know, sort of touch, and then I'm done, Herschel, with the mic for a bit. You talked about optimism. I'll give a slightly different view and a maybe practical view. My father always told me, he said that if you could write your problem on a piece of paper and crumple it up and put it in a jar, and everybody else put their problems in the jar, would you keep your own problem, or would you take a chance and pick somebody else's problem out? You see, we all have problems and we all have stresses. But when you look out of your world, you can see that other people have bigger stresses than you. And I know in South Africa, we're going through tough times. We're thinking about COVID. We're thinking about safety and security. We're thinking about prosperity. These are the 3 big things for me personally that I'm thinking about. But if you're prepared to make a difference, if you put your hand up, if you're prepared to think differently, if you embrace diversity, true transformation and diversity, what this country needs, and you venture beyond this little bubble that we live in, whether we live in a little area, whether we live in a little business, the light can shine in this country. I really truly believe it. It can shine. The grass is not greener on the other side. But if you sit back and you wait and you watch, it's going to be a little tougher.
Thanks, Greg. Amanda, I'm gonna move across to you. So Simon Slay talks about leaders eating last. What do employees need to see from leaders? What does leaders eating last mean? Does it mean sacrificing a greater proportion of their salary, working harder? What does it mean to people to see their leaders eating last?
Thanks, Hirsch. I think that there are 3 components that really leaders need to almost be engaged in to motivate employees at this time. We're in insurance, so it's, to hear that story around restaurants, it is incredibly humbling. But I think that what leaders need to do is firstly to create aspirational value. And what I mean by that is to give hope. People are looking for hope. And we've just added, in fact, we went through a process last year to look at our value system within the organization and to say, is it still relevant? And if it is, great. And if not, is there some way that we can tweak it? And one of the things that we did add, we've always had the value of optimism, but we did add in as a descriptor to that, is to seek positive signals. Because to some extent we might be wired to focus on that negativity. And we wanted to kind of shift everybody's mindset to say, let's try and seek the positive signals. And when you seek the positive signals, then hopefully that enables people to come up with ideas like the one that Greg said. That's a positive mindset, that people are coming up with a solution for all. So I think the first point is really to create hope and to create a bit of optimism for people and to inspire them. And often it's done through a core purpose, a very succinct focus, a very strong focus on your core purpose. I think the second thing that leaders are needing to do is to focus on people. To Simon Sinek's point and to Richard's point, it's really about having that empathy and that compassion around people and understanding where people are at, but at the same time containing some of that anxiety. It is, as Greg said, about listening and waking up to the noise that you hear. That people component is absolutely crucial. We've lost 10 employees to COVID. And people are grieving, and it's about understanding that grief and dealing with it and being sensitive to it, and at the same time containing it so that people can move forward and focus on purpose. And then the third component that we're focusing on is really on getting the job done. It's on the task. People feel uplifted. They feel like they're moving forward when they're doing something. It's in that task, in the actual doing, in the act of doing, that you start to feel like you're making a bit of progress. And so if we can inspire people around purpose and meaning, if we can listen to some of the difficulties that they're going through and then be very authentic in the way in which we deal with it, and then we focus on the task, on getting the job done, those 3 components seem to be working in driving that optimism. I have to say, just to add to that, is that the power of a purpose and a set of values is that it's incredibly democratizing. In a sense, that purpose and those values, those kind of are available to everyone. Everybody can draw on them, and everybody's governed by them. And that means that everybody has the opportunity to kind of achieve that purpose and use those values. And that's incredibly democratizing. But that's been in a sense, our focus is to really provide hope and steer and a sense of optimism by seeking those positive signals, to focus on our people and where they're at and make sure that we're engaging with them, communicating with them, listening to them, being empathetic and compassionate, and then focus on the task. Let's get this job done. Let's see how we can get involved. Let's focus on those solutions and actually move forward. People feel incredibly inspired when they see progress. I hope that helps.
Hirsch, I have a slew of questions that have come in from the audience, if I may pose them.
Right.
The one is that culture is something that you can build upon, but is recruitment not really the key? That you have to recruit people who come into your organization with the correct values to start, because you can never teach values. You have to actually have those values and then fit into the right culture. That's question number one. Similar question that's coming is about leadership. Is leadership something that you can teach, or is that naturally and innately within an individual? Or can you actually teach it? And so I have a friend in the United States called Susan Cain, who wrote a book called Quiet, The Power of Introverts. She sold about 4 million copies, New York Times bestseller list. And one of the facts that Susan says is that introverts are often discriminated against in the workplace because they're not there to stand up and lead. They may have greater value than many of the extroverts, but we tend to overlook them because they don't volunteer themselves to come forward. And I think often there's a gender issue relating to that as well, that often in the workplace, women are not as forthcoming to take leadership positions that they should, and therefore we just overlook them because we don't volunteer, or they don't volunteer themselves. And the last set of questions, if we can just go to a theme that keeps on coming up in the questions on all the channels, and that is, how do you lead, how do you manage when your workforce is sitting at home? When you're no longer in the office and you have to now manage a disparate workforce, everyone's in thousands of locations rather than in one or two buildings. How do you manage? And Greg, one of the questions that came in for you is, how do you discipline people as well when they're not necessarily sitting in the office as well? How do you measure their performance? We're in a completely new and different world here, and we often just don't have those skills to manage in a dispersed workforce.
There was
okay, go Rich.
Quite a number of questions there. So I mean, I'll just jump in with one or two ideas, and one of the ideas I think that we all need to process and digest, and this talks to that, can you train leadership? I think that you first have to define leadership, and we've always defined it as a title, and I think what's happening now within society is we defining it as a set of values and shared actions. And I think that if one takes responsibility for the well-being of others, whether it's family members, whether it's community members, whether it's colleagues, whether it's a workforce, I think that really defines leadership in these times. And I say these times because you have certain individuals who are really good in crisis. Their leadership style is exceptional under pressure. Good examples, Winston Churchill. And outside of crisis, they kind of disappear into anonymity. Now, what makes them so effective when the chips are down, and less effective when the chips, everything is great? And often it stems from genetics. There's 7 or 8 molecules and systems that really fundamentally govern our ability to adapt successfully to adverse and difficult situations and get up after we get knocked down. And there is a genetic component to it, but with everything in life, everything is a combination of genetics and environments. And I think that if we have a predisposition to lead in difficult times, we do have this resilience X factor, and we have a compass that will govern our direction. I think that leadership can really be attained and mastered by a lot more people than what we currently realize. But I just want to talk very, very briefly to one point. And the one point is that, why are so many people taking so much strain at this point in time? Why is it that workforces are struggling to the same? We've touched on stress, and we've touched a little bit on personal stress, but what is this chronic stress within the workforce, which is so destructive? I mean, the cost of chronic stress in the South African economy is 276 billion rand a year, and that was pre-COVID. So that's just to give you an understanding. And fundamentally, it's because there's been a breach of the psychological contract. So for 80 years, secure employment was operating on a certain premise. The premise was that the employer promised job security, fair remuneration, growth opportunities, as well as benefits and self-worth. And as a means of compensation, the employee would offer commitment and engagement and dedication and total loyalty. Now, what's happened here is a total breakdown, because a lot of employers can't offer the job security. They can't offer the growth opportunities. They can hardly guarantee a set salary. So what we're seeing is a breakdown from employer to employee in that relationship, where you can't expect the same level of dedication. You can't expect the same level of commitment, the same level of loyalty. And one has to take a position as a leader or someone who has a team, saying that, how do I rebuild this? We know we can't do that anymore. This whole model that's existed for 80 years doesn't exist in this world that Greg so rightly pointed out, that everything's been accelerated by 10 years or so. So that model doesn't work. What do we do and where do we go? And we actually have to rewrite the script. And that's for another narrative. But it's everything that Greg has talked about, like authenticity and solving problems and the empowerment piece, and that's really where we have to start in rewriting the contract, because what we want to do is provide more security for people, make them feel more valued, more stability for them, and more predictability in their lives. And the old model doesn't work anymore. And if we can achieve that, all of a sudden an incredible transformation takes place.
Amanda, let me move to you just on one of Howard's questions. Is exactly that. So when you're employing someone, when you're sitting down to interview someone, and how do you kind of, like, is there a culture checklist? Like, should the person, the CEO, the leader, depending on interviewing, should they have a checklist of the characteristics, of the behaviors, of how do you check off the people you're interviewing versus the people you want to have in the culture, and how do you do that?
Yeah, there's no doubt, Hirsch. Look, we have a commitment to employing the best possible people. That's one of our core values. But there's no doubt that culture is part of that. That we have to make sure that the person is going to be able to thrive within the organization. Just to be clear, fitting in with culture doesn't mean that we're creating a homogenous workforce. You know, it's still a celebration of diversity and inclusion, and making sure that the voices that we get come with their own experiences, their own ethnicity, their own race, their own religion, their own backgrounds, etc. Because we know that when we get that diversity into the organization, the debate is richer, the outcome therefore is richer. So we are absolutely committed to making sure that we get the best possible people in for the role, in for the job, and we certainly do look to that in terms of culture. Are the people does it resonate with them? If our culture, if our values as an organization doesn't resonate with your own personal values, you know, then it's not going to have any meaning, and it's going to be very hard to navigate. So we certainly do look at that. Having said that, I just want to make the point that once people are within the organization, it's important to liberate the best in them and to make sure that they are able to thrive. So it's not enough just to have the best possible people in for the role. What we want to do is give them a fertile environment to go and do what they never thought was possible, and to measure themselves by impact and not necessarily by title. Because for us, the ultimate title is actually our core purpose of making people healthier and our values. That's the culture actually becomes your ultimate CEO. You know, that's what drives everyone. And it's as everyone has said, it's run by leadership and people entrench it, but everybody's part of that process of culture. So yes, it's important to recruit for culture, yes. But then once people are in, we have to liberate the best in them. I want to make one more point, and that is that sometimes we don't get it right. We recruit, and maybe they don't necessarily fit in with the culture. And our culture is paramount. It democratizes. So if you can't fit in with the culture, ultimately what will happen is that the person will leave, you know, it just doesn't work. So we see that we're non-negotiable on our culture. It's the one thing actually within the discovery environment that is non-negotiable actually. Everything else we invite people to come in and weigh in and give their views. But the one thing that's not negotiable is our core purpose and our values. So we certainly do recruit to that, but we want people to come in and liberate the best in themselves, to come in and do what they never thought was possible, and to draw hopefully on that culture to do so.
Hirsch, maybe Amanda can actually talk to the issue of introverts within an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, there's no doubt, in addition to culture democratizing, as you say, brilliance is everywhere, you know, and how do you recognize, you know, the people who are not stepping up and necessarily putting themselves forward? We've got a number of tracks and a number of touch points that we've created to make sure that we bring that to life. And so, you know, we'll promote people, if not necessarily along the lines, you know, you've got a brilliant person who's exceptional at the role that they do, but they don't necessarily want to lead people. We'll still promote them along what we call a specialist track. So we kind of still making sure that we're recognizing and rewarding and providing that fertile environment that I spoke about by creating an avenue that really suits that individual. Not everybody wants to be in that leadership role, but can be through a different format. And therefore we create the leadership or management role as well as the specialist track. And by doing both of those, we're bringing to life those introverts, as you call them, the people who are a bit more more quiet. As you say, there's some people who work on a meritocracy. You know, they think that they'll do great work, and then you'll realize that they've done great work and you'll recognize them, versus people who are much more mercenary about getting out there and demanding it. And so what this solves for is making sure that we're not overlooking those brilliant people who are perhaps a bit less noisy, but exceptional nevertheless. So it's making sure that we have those touch points and finding those brilliant people and recognizing them and rewarding them accordingly.
Before we go, there was a question, Greg, you know, how do you make sure that people are still working effectively from home, and how do you discipline? But Karen, I wanted to ask you, is everything in the stressful environment, you know, people are at home, they're working from home, there's the blurring of work at home, there's financial pressures, there's uncertainty that Richard alluded to. Is everything up to the organization and the leaders? What should staff members, what should employees be doing? What should people be doing to self-help themselves? Or does it sit with leadership, and does it sit with the organization?
So thanks. If I can go back for 1 second, Herschel, if you don't mind, to the question on culture as well, because I think it's and the values around culture, because I think it's quite an important thing. You know, we've got big organizations represented here, and I think it's really important for people to understand that you have a culture in your organization, whether you like it or not, and whether you manage it or not. So people know, and I mean, you alluded to it, I think Amanda alluded to it right at the beginning, what this is the smell of the place. This is the smell of the place. People come into an organization and they know how it makes them feel. And I think that, so whether or not you think you're managing your culture, whether or not you think you've got a culture, people are experiencing your organization a particular way. People are hearing, and I'll come back to this because it relates to stress. They're hearing the way that you reward people. They're hearing the way that you punish people. They're looking at who's in the organization. They look at who's out in the organization. They look at how do you engage with them, and they're interpreting that, and they're making sense of that, and they're acting in accordance with that. And I think that you can manage the culture, but I think it's really important that to be careful of only recruiting and only selecting. And I feel really strongly about this for values, for value fit. When I was growing up, I'm not that young anymore, but we used to talk about the organization man. And that word organization man was, we used to do assessments, because people would say, come into our organization and tell me what's the kind of ideal organization man. And you have to be very careful when you recruit and when you select based on common values. And it talks to Howard's point earlier about introverts as well. You have a tremendous danger of just replicating yourself. It's a huge danger in selection and recruitment at the best of times. But if you go into that and I'm not saying that you can accept a complete culture crash, but if you just go in selecting on the basis of common values in South Africa, I think it is disastrous, because the values in South African organizations remain, in many organizations, the values of white male organizational culture. You've got to bring diversity in there. And if you only recruit on the basis of we want people like us, you're only going to get people like you. And I think it's a death knell for innovation. I think it's a death knell for creativity. I think it's a death knell for diversity. So I was feeling quite strongly about that point. To your point on stress, though, I'm going to again, it's quite interesting to actually know where the term stress comes from. It's an engineering term, and I really love the term, because I think it really depicts what stress is all about. It comes from a term, it's stressair. And what the initial engineering term was talking about is it's pressure being brought to bear on an object until it buckles or breaks. And I think that's the image of stress that everybody should have in their mind. That's what stress is. You place pressure on an object, and as I said, the initial idea was on a physical object, and you keep on placing pressure, and you keep on placing pressure, and you keep on placing pressure, and eventually that object will buckle or it will break. There are two ways of addressing that stress. You can support the object, you can bolster the object, or you can relieve the stress. You can take off the pressure. And I feel that both sides need to happen. You can't put people in a toxic environment. You can't place excessive demands on them and then expect them to go and do some mindfulness or go for a walk or do something to relieve the stress, come back to the same environment and then place that stress on them again. So a lot of the responsibility does in fact lie on leadership, on the organization, on the context. Context is absolutely key. If you keep pushing pressure on that object, if you keep putting pressure on your employees, you have to do something to bolster them or they will buckle and break. So my very strong sense is that you need to do both. The organization needs to take responsibility that it is not creating an environment where people are likely to burn out. They need to provide people with resources. And these are not, they sound highfalutin, they sound complicated. They're not. One of the simplest ways to address stress is to say, these are the demands. What resources do my staff need to meet those demands? Psychological, physiological. If we can get a match between the demands that are being made on our staff and the resources that we provide them to meet the demands, the stress dissipates. So I know it's not a popular view because the popular view is very much the idea that it's very individual, that people themselves need to be resilient, that people need to manage their own stress and deal with their own stress. But in fact, when it comes to burnout, and this is the most recent, I read it a week ago, the biggest factors relating to burnout are organizational factors. They're not individual factors. They're not individual vulnerabilities. So don't fix an individual who's not broken, fix the system that's broken. So I don't want to go too extreme, but I think you need to do both. You need to bolster the individual, and that the leadership needs to do that, the individual needs to take responsibility for. But you also have to make sure that the environment in which people are operating is not the kind of environment that where you can release some of that stress. That's the organization's responsibility.
Fantastic, thanks, Kate. Greg, over to you. Just around how you manage productivity, how you discipline people.
There's so much happening in this conversation. I'll just leave you with one or two loose-ended comments. Well, firstly, Mr. Howard, you are an extrovert. I don't know if you know that, but you are. And I don't know if you know that I'm actually an introvert. I would have never done this in the past, So leaders can change over time, and we taught on how to do things. So talking about culture and leaders, I call it freedom within the framework. There's a certain core, 70%, you're looking for that culture and that leadership, but you've got to be able to change it. Now, here's a tricky one, maybe for our experts over here. Is the culture of your business the same in 2030? Because if you want to change your culture, the professor's absolutely right. We're living in South Africa. This is a rainbow nation. If your business doesn't look like the outside of what the country looks like, you're going to be irrelevant. Because if the outside environment is changing quicker than the inside environment, you've probably got 5 years left. So culture also needs to change. And that's the diversity that Prof's talking about and Amanda's talking about as well. The other thing as well that I would be remiss not to mention, as a white male over here, I don't do justice to 60% of McDonald's people are women in this organization. They're powerful. And 10 years ago, we were 20%. Now we're 60%. So if you focus on diversifying your organization, you focus on transforming, because if 50% of our customers are women, why aren't 50% of our people women? But to your point, working away, working from home, well, doesn't this conferencing make it that much easier? I mean, I can be on it. I can be you right here in my living room. And so for performance management and trying to get tasks done, it's actually become simpler. What the only thing it's left me is I've got this big office in Johannesburg. I don't know what to do with this big office in Johannesburg. So I said I wasn't going to use this word. We've definitely pivoted straight away. We have different packages for our people to choose to work from home. We've used our restaurants now as environments for people to go to restaurants and work from a restaurant. And we've now converted some of our restaurants. As a customer, you won't see them, but there's almost boardrooms in about 25 of our restaurants already where our people can work from there. So there's no need for people to drive from Pretoria to the office. Just go into the restaurants, have this unbelievable setup, and we want to make sure they get a CapEx budget, they get an OpEx budget. So things have changed. Performance management has changed. And my last point in performance management, because I'm open-ended in all these things, is we got to evaluate performance. But in our business, we're very, very clear that half of your performance goes to your leadership behaviors and culture. Half of your performance rating goes to how you do things, not what you do. So you can knock it out of the park. But if you're not actually measuring culture and values, then you might as well not even start. So there's some views from me, Herschel.
Fantastic, thank you. I just wanted a couple more questions. I know we're already sort of 10 past 10 and it's getting late. But I wanted to ask, and maybe whoever wants to answer that question, working from home, the dispersed environment, has it placed more pressure on, and Greg, you mentioned, gender, has it placed more pressure on women as mothers, as employees, as they have to feed the family? Has it placed a disproportionately high burden on women in the current environment, and what should organizations be doing if that's the case?
I'm happy to start off with.
Yeah.
I think I haven't seen any research, in fact, in South Africa, and I think in South Africa there has been, we have been, certainly professional women. Professional women have to some extent been protected because we do have domestic help. I think the issue across the world and in South Africa has not been necessarily working from home. It's been kids being at home, teaching online, and there is no question that burden has predominantly fell on women, to the point where US statistics are suggesting that this has put professional women in the workplace back years, that the consequences for their career has been catastrophic. I haven't seen it in South Africa. I'm not sure. I've certainly heard anecdotally about the difficulties that women are experiencing, and they do seem to be bearing the brunt. Having said that, on the other hand, we do talk about hope and positive framing. I think what's been amazing about this as well, though, is how it's normalized the idea of women and children. And it started a bit before COVID with that BBC interview and that guy whose kid walked in. I'm sure you all know what I'm referring to. And that poor woman who leopard crawled in to drag the kid out of the BBC interview. But we're seeing it the whole time now. People's kids are walking behind them because they haven't got allocated place. And I think that's been a really positive outcome, is the idea that what used to be seen as so unprofessional, the idea that a mother, that you had kids, that you had to leave to go and fetch them or watch something, or that there was a baby crying in the background. I remember that when you took a business call was seen as so unprofessional. And now we're accepting. We're mothers, we're fathers. It's not unprofessional if your kid happens to walk in front of your screen in the middle of your call. So I think that there is a major problem where the burden has fallen primarily on women, and that's primarily around kids being at home. But I also think the positive is it's really normalized the idea that we do have a home and that we do have kids.
Yeah, I must comment as well. I think it is tougher for the ladies in the business, but we have a responsibility to unlock and do that. It's normal for me when my chief operating officer, Joanne DeVet, has her kids come into the room, and then I say hello to Brent. Hey, Brent, I know her children now, so this is part of us. Jo DeVet says to me, it's not about balance, Greg. She talks about harmony. This is a mom of 4 kids, chief operating officer of McDonald's. She needs harmony in her life, which means she may need to meet me at 10 o'clock when the kids are sleeping, and I give her that time, all right, for her to be able to do that. So we juggle it and we make sure that there's protection there.
I couldn't agree with that more. I agree with that comment as well. I think that it's not balanced. People ask me all the time about work-life balance, and I couldn't agree with that more. It's not balanced. It's work is very much a part of our lives, and our lives are very much a part of work. And it's finding the synergy to kind of get the best out of both. And it's 100% correct, and what the Prof said, I couldn't agree more either, is that, I remember days leaving from work a little bit earlier And people didn't really understand that. Why was I leaving a little bit earlier? But what's happened is a shift. People are understanding that life is part of your workplace and your work experience, and that they might end up getting, as Greg said, a meeting or an email at 10 o'clock at night. There is certainly a shift. I think that for those of us working women specifically, but generally people working from home, my sense is that one of the best ways to navigate it, and again, there's no science in this and there's certainly no hubris at all, but I think that one of the best things that we can do is to kind of manage our work environment into our life environment. In other words, let life take that priority and manage work around life. And to some extent, when the kids did go into lockdown and they were at home, were trying to be educated online, to have a 9 o'clock meeting that extends for 3 hours and then to go out to an 8-year-old and says, okay, and say, now let's go on to online schooling when they can't concentrate by that time is just not realistic. And so we shifted a lot of our days. My team consisted of a few women, and we shifted our days and we decided that we'd start our meetings a bit later so that we could do our online schooling earlier. And so that's what I mean by managing your work into life. Make that one of the things. And the other thing is just to remember that you always feel like you're never doing either justice. You're never quite doing either of them justice. You're letting the side down no matter which way you turn. And to answer that, I feel like it's okay for all of us to make peace with imperfection. If the house isn't 100% clean, if the kids are being babysat by Peppa Pig or PlayStation, we'll be forgiven, and like it's to make peace with some of that, with that imperfection, and then to be present. When you're at family time, dinner table, don't go onto those emails, that's family time. And when you're at work, be at work. And if you can, then you're getting perhaps that synergy as opposed to balance, because I'm not sure that balance is a realistic outcome.
Thanks, Amanda. Fantastic. We've got a question here from Daniel Smolin, which is, so much of an organization's culture is maintained at the coffee machine, water cooler, and in the corridors. How do you maintain this when people are no longer co-located and dispersed at home?
I'm happy to take that as well. It talks to culture again, and it's a deliberate process. You have to create those those water cooler moments, and it took us a while to almost jump onto understanding this. But as soon as we did, we realized the impact of it. Having webinars where we talk, bringing in fabulous speakers that inspire, having what Greg was speaking about, those 1-minute videos on the balcony. Those are your water cooler moments, but you have to be deliberate about creating them, about creating those touch points. And to reinvigorate people, and it's on multiple avenues. We've had comedians coming in when we realized that people needed a bit of a laugh, and then we've had a couple of weeks ago, one of our businesses brought in the first Black South African woman who summited Everest and spoke about some of the lessons that she learned in that process. Bringing in just different people. It doesn't have to be necessarily keynote address speakers, even just some of our own leaders or people within the organization sharing their experiences. This week, one of our leaders shared some of her grief at losing a family member to COVID and how she was dealing with that. Those are the water cooler moments that we're talking about. And as long as they're authentic, they will be incredibly impactful. They have to be real. It's not doing it for the sake of doing it. It's doing it because we actually want to connect, because we are multifaceted beings, and because we need that human interaction. And if we do that with that in mind, and create those moments, that's where you see the impact. You're almost recreating those water cooler moments in a different form.
Great, thanks, Amanda. Greg, Karen, Richard, anything to add around holding culture when you've got such a dispersed workforce?
I can add just in terms of the well-being of your teams, and I think that does tie into, cultures being collective values and behaviors. I think that Karen was spot on when she said, like, the first point of intervention is the stressor within an organization. And there was an incredible Australian meta-analysis, involved 90 studies over a 15-year period, just looking at different intervention, how they affect people in businesses and how they affect profitability in the business. And they looked at different interventions. Some programs basically diminished the stresses. They added more support, made people feel more valued, reduced the demands. Some programs offered instrumental support where they taught people how to look after themselves more effectively. And some programs were just reactive in their nature, in terms of, if someone has a problem, we're going to address it very successfully as quickly as possible and then return you back to the workplace. And what the study found was, by a long way, it was those programs that actually had the intention of reducing the stresses in the first place. And I think that's where I'm talking to this cultural piece, or this behavioral piece, is that if leaders and if teams can make people feel more valued, make sure that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, there are prospects going forward, provide instrumental support, help, assistance, guidance, mentorship, give people a voice, provide learning opportunities, collaborative learning opportunities, make people feel part of a collective, and create something that's of meaning and purpose and something to aspire to. I think that you're really going to create a transcendence, and this can be done in a remote fashion. It's not something that has to be shoulder to shoulder, face to face on an ongoing basis. And that's just my input from a health and performance standpoint.
Thanks, Richard. We've got a comment here, Greg, for you. It says, I eat regularly at McDonald's, and both the service and the food is outstanding. So well done. In my own backyard, my associates are critical of this restaurant group and refuse to eat their food. Can McDonald's please go on a marketing campaign to convince the people out that there is nothing wrong with their food, and actively dispel the misconceptions people have? Also, to have unlimited Wi-Fi, even at a fee for patrons to use. So
I thought we were talking about culture here, and then all of a sudden we want to talk. If we want to talk about food, we have to have enough. But to that person that wrote that comment, I personally invite you to come into the kitchen with me. We'll cook the food. We'll see where the source of the food is coming from, right down to the cow or the lettuce or whatever. So I'm very comfortable with that particular point. But we got a luxury. I mean, we got 310 coffee shops out there, and we find a place, whether it's Fourways or Hammanskraal or Toandu or Musina, we gathering around and spending our time, but socializing and building that teamwork. We don't really have department updates in McDonald's. There's no finance update. We have cross-functional teams. So every time there's an update for me, I want to understand finance, HC or HR, whatever's involved. And we do that in restaurants, which is really, really great. So we're privileged not to have that problem. There's a lot of socializing happening, but it's just out there in the world, not in the head office.
Howie, I wanted to just maybe spend a couple of minutes just taking everyone through, Richard, you spoke a lot about how people can help themselves and deal with stress, and Karen has given us a really brutal definition of the engineering definition of stress, which is pretty brutal and really eye-opening. So I wanted to do that, and then just end on hope and optimism, and play a quick Simon Sinek video. But have you got any other questions there, Howie?
No, Hirsch, I think let's actually talk about practical tools, and let's talk about some hope and optimism. We probably have about 5 or 6 minutes left before we have to end.
Great. So what I'm going to just quickly do now is I'm going to screen share. Richard, you've developed an app that people can actually use to help measure their stress and to manage that stress. I think Danny's going to post up. I think it's available on the various app stores, Apple and the Google. I'm just going to screen share and just take us through a couple of the slides, and maybe then you'll just talk to what that app can do very briefly. We'll go into hope and optimism, and we'll wrap it up. Let me just screen share. And let me just put that onto presentation. So you've got this app. It's called the Stress Code, and I went into it and did it. I'm not sure if I answered it truthfully, because my stress scores came back a little better than I expected. But you go into a setup wizard. It asks you where you want to improve your health. To excel, you want to manage your stress better, you want to be able to thrive in difficult circumstances. And then maybe just to flick through some of the screens, which I think all of us have alluded to, I demand a lot for myself and can be unforgiving of myself, and there's some choices. I'm really struggling financially at the moment, and I think we've spoken about just the financial stress that people are under. I feel that I work in a supportive and collaborative work environment, and all of you have spoken so strongly about this concept of collaboration. Stress and worry keep me awake at night. And then there are a whole series, so there must be 40 or 50 questions, and then it comes out and it gives you a score on your stress, on your mood, on burnout, on your levels of resilience that you're showing. And then once again, it gives you certain metrics about your optimism and persistence, your health habits, and then it gives you solutions across diet, exercise, supplement to take, and you can then obviously monitor it on an ongoing basis. And maybe just give us a very brief synopsis of what does this app do? How do you use it? And is this something that everyone can use on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really is talking to, there's two parts to this app. There's a personal piece and an organizational piece, and all the data is anonymized. The personal piece is really saying, trying to identify, if you want to change something, you have to identify what it is that you want to change. So it really dives deeply into that. There's 12 fundamental stresses that exist within a work environment and within our lives. There are obviously a few more, but those are the primary stresses, and each have a different effect on our psychological, physiological, and overall well-being. So that there's distinctive influences that these stresses have. So it basically identifying the type of stress that is affecting you, the potential area that it may affect, and then there is a solutions model. The solutions model involves kind of broader stress management protocols, like using a strategy for stress just to help get through the next period. Or alternatively, if there's specific things that you challenge with, you're worrying a lot, or you can't sleep at night, or you have certain pressures, what you can do to manage those pressures more successfully. It's very much an evidence-based tool. So really, I do love the science. From an organizational standpoint, there's a back end. So organizations have the ability to look at it from a more kind of objective perspective. As I say, totally anonymized. Basically, the landscape can be painted in terms of what is it that is stressing people the most. Is it high demands? Is it long working hours? Is it a lack of support? Is it not feeling valued? Is it job insecurity? And from that platform, the intervention process can begin. Instead of reacting to something, this is a proactive piece in terms of saying that this is where we're holding out now. Let's see what we can do in addressing this particular area. This is what people are speaking to. And it's very much that proactive piece, which you can check in at a later stage. Also, there's been, I think, 2 huge studies, collaborative studies between researchers at Harvard and Stanford universities, looking at the implication of different types of stress on different health outcomes: mental health, physical health, chronic disease risk, as well as even premature death. And basically looks at those type of stresses and can even model what the potential prevalence of mental health and physical health issues could be, or even pain within an organization. So it's a really nice tool just to kind of paint the landscape, and then the user has that opportunity just to help provide some more resources for them in their time of need, while the organization's doing their bit in this collaborative dual relationship.
Thanks, Richard. And just Danny, if you can, Andy Collier is asking if you could post the iPhone store link as well. I think you've posted up the Google link. If you could post up the iPhone store link. We're going to end with just one more quick video clip on hope and optimism. And then I'm going to ask the panel just to talk to it, give us their view, and we're going to wrap it up. So Danny, if you could just play that last clip.
First one. It's from Melina. Melina asks, are there times where you shouldn't be optimistic? No. You should always be optimistic. But it's sometimes difficult to be optimistic. But the striving should always be to be optimistic. I can't think of a reason why we wouldn't want to be optimistic. Again, optimism is different from blind positivity. It doesn't mean it's the denial of difficult times. It's not naive. We can believe that we're in a dark tunnel, but we can still stay focused on the light at the end of the tunnel. That's what optimism is. It's the belief that the future is bright. Okay.
Thank you. So I want to just end on that, because hope and optimism, and especially in the South African context, is so big. So how do you create that hope and optimism? And I think some of you alluded to it. And at the same time, there is a brutal reality to South Africa and the economy and COVID, and we could almost all reach out and touch these vaccinations that arrived, and suddenly, you know, that they've been pulled back. And there's a saying that says, you know, that the coldest part of the night is the light before the dawn, and it almost feels that's where we are. We're in the coldest part of the night, and we're waiting for the dawn. So I'm going to go around the panel. And Greg, I'm gonna kick off with you. How do you create that hope and optimism? But there's some brutal realities that we still have to face.
Absolutely brutal realities. This is a tough country to live in. COVID, safety and security, prosperity, the Gini coefficient, discrimination across the board. You know, people that have been previously disadvantaged. These are big issues that we're dealing with in our world. But I think COVID's taught us that the world has said to us, look at things differently. And I think the first thing we got to do is we got to redefine what's important to us. Not that fancy car or that fancy house or earning more or having another holiday home. It's not about that. Redefine what is your success, and have a look at where do you want to be in 10 years' time. Peg it financially, family-wise, love-wise, kids-wise. What does they want? And work towards that destination. Remove all the other petty stuff. But most importantly, stand up. Stand up. For the yids out there that are listening, stop kibitzing from the sidelines. Get out and do something. Get out and make a difference. Get out and make a change. And therefore, you'll be actually rewarding yourself, and you'll be rewarding other people as well. So for me, it keeps me so motivated that every day I want to wake up and I want to sort of get involved and make a difference. I just don't know where to find the time anymore. But I can imagine it would be pretty daunting, just sitting at home, not doing anything, just kibitzing from the sidelines. That could be pretty stressful.
Right, Amanda?
I mean, I love that. I love the idea of finding a purpose and then defining what your own personal purpose is and driving towards that, because the minute you have a sense of purpose, it kind of enables you to kind of pin your ears back and put your head down and just make your way to that. But I am on a bit of a track at the moment around seeking those positive signals, because I think that we're bombarded all day long with some of the negative signals. We're looking at the numbers as they come out every single night about COVID. We're looking at the economy, and we've just had SONA, and all of these pieces of information are bombarding us on a daily basis. I think it's so important to seek out some of those positive signals, some of the positive things that are going on, because that then helps to motivate us and infuse us with that optimism so that we can drive towards that sense of purpose. So you know, I remember a few years ago we launched something called a good news campaign, and that's kind of where we're at again, is to try and send out messages of hope of some of the good things that are going on, the progress that's being made. When you're optimistic, and as Simon Sinek said, not naive optimism, genuinely optimistic, that you have an understanding of the brutal reality in which you find yourself, but the will and determination to overcome it. That's when you're able to take that step forward. The best way, I think, to do it at the moment is to seek those positive signals, to find that positivity and take that step forward.
Richard?
I think that the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. So I think that sometimes it appears so overwhelming, and that we don't know how to change the world. We don't have the power to change our country. We don't have the power to change anyone's life, but we do. We have an exceptional ability to impact the lives of those around us. And I think that if each one of us takes our unique skills and talents and abilities and shares it and spreads it, I think that it can become infectious. And I think that, you mentioned the darkest point in the night is just before dawn. And I think that this whole recalibration is really reset the way we view the world. And I think that this is one of those opportune moments where things can change and things are changing, and we just have to stay kind of aligned, and we have to stay motivated.
And Karen, I'm going to end on you.
Okay, so I think the key thing is that hope and optimism are not about fairy dust and fairy dust and unicorns. You can't tell people to be hopeful. I can't say to you, you should have hope. You can't tell people to be optimistic. You can't hold up a glass in front of them, and if they see it as half empty, say to them, change your mind, see it as half full. What you can do, though, is talk about what hope and optimism actually mean. So hope is a profound, profound concept. It goes right back in history. If you think about Pandora's box, okay, so go back in history, go back to where it comes from. Pandora, a bit like whoever ate that bat, I won't mention in the country, who knows what racist or who isn't, but the ochre opened, who ate the bat, he released terrible ills onto our world. And, it's too late to shut the box. And as Pandora did, the little bottom of the box is hope, is the way we get through it. And it's an attitude, it's not an emotion. So hope is about setting goals when they aren't achieved. Deal with it, kind of live with the grief, because we are going through grieving times. We are in trauma times. We need to experience the grief. But it's also about saying, okay, so we didn't get the vaccine. For me, it was like a visceral blow. That research about the vaccine. It was like we'd all been holding such hope that things would go back to normal when we got that vaccine. And I needed to sit with that. I needed to catch my breath for a moment. And then there were other ways of thinking, well, it's not the vaccine I want. Okay. What I want, go back to what we're looking for, what we want. What I want is a world where I can engage with people again. I want a world that I'm not fearful of getting sick and dying in. I want a world which feels like it's abundant again and not so narrow again. And there are other ways of achieving that. One of them will be through a vaccine. We'll get a vaccine. And there are other ways, and that's for me what hope is about keeping, and I think Greg really spoke about kind of what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? And can you find ways around achieving what you actually want to achieve when what you thought you had wanted disappears or goes? And for me, that's what hope is. It's an attitude, it's a way of thinking. It's not just, I hope this all gets better soon. But I really do. So that's what
Thank you so much, Greg, Richard, Professor Karen Milner, and Amanda. And just some of the key word take-homes: authenticity, communication, engagement, get involved, look for the good news and the positive signals. I hope we've debunked this word culture. Thank you so much to our viewers and our listeners across South Africa and the world. Thank you so much to our panelists once again for giving up your time and giving us some amazing information. We wish you good health to you and your people, and stay safe. And Howie, I'm going to hand over to you.
Hirsch, I think one of the great lessons for me tonight has been the fact that culture is not just about business. Culture is about our lives. It's about our families. We should have a family culture. We should have a community culture. We should have a work culture, and none of them can be disparate. If part of your culture is honesty and integrity, well, you must behave in your personal life to live those values, because that's part of your personal culture. And that's the sort of values you want to instill in your kids and your family and your community around you. We shouldn't just be looking at this through a corporate lens. We need to be looking at it through a personal lens and a family lens. And I think we should take all of the lessons that this remarkable panel and an inspirational panel this evening, those lessons that they've given us. And I think you talk about hope and optimism, so we'll wait another month or two for the vaccine. And in a year or two, we'll look back and say, wow, do you remember those crazy times we lived through but we say, oh, I miss the time that I spent with my family. I miss the time that I was helping educate my children. We'll look back at some of the positivity. I think you and I will look back and say, wow, remember those times when we were running webinars and we were providing a service to the people of South Africa and a platform around the world. We'll miss those times because we're doing something constructive that has value, that is really helping everyone. So with that, a huge thank you to everyone tonight. It's been absolutely inspirational to listen to you all. We'll see you later on in the week. Don't forget, we've got some spectacular webinars coming up. So thank you all for joining us. To our panelists, you are true inspirational to all in South Africa. Thank you. Good night. We'll see you at webinar 76.
Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. Cheers, everybody.
And Greg, I can't help thinking you sounded like me. You sounded like you were using a Shure mic like me. Good quality microphone tonight.
I think Greg's gone.
Greg is gone. Cheers.
Thanks,
good night.
Cheers, Howie.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.